And let's not at any point, be deterred or be discouraged. It's going to be a long and painful journey, but it's a journey that we have to undertake for the benefit of our future generations.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of The Truth in Development, powered by Ntiyiso Consulting Group. My name is Aubrey Masango, and today I have as my guest the Chief Executive Officer of the Ntiyiso Group, Mr. Alex Mabunda. He is here with me. But before I even start the conversation with Mr. Alex Mabunda, there is a conversation across the African continent about a need to industrialize. Here in South Africa, we speak about the need to create more black industrialists. But industry and industrialization does not have a very good historical story to tell, particularly as it pertains to how companies from the developed world have come to Africa specifically, South Africa even more specifically. And the attitude has been largely extractionist, what they could take out of the continent. Ntiyiso Consulting Group has seen industrialization as a core pillar of the reason for their existence. We're going to have a conversation with the CE this evening about what is different with their approach. What is it that they want to understand and develop as far as industrialization is concerned? So join us as we have this conversation so that you understand exactly what it is that we mean when we speak industrialization. Mr. Alex Mabunda, thank you very much for joining us this evening. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Aubrey, and thank you for having me.
Industrialization is a big topic. Here in South Africa, we are constantly talking about we need to industrialize because maybe that's the way we're going to absorb more people into the labor market so people can work. But we are faced with the fact that there is greater automation that's taking place. We're talking about artificial intelligence at the moment. Talk to me about what is Ntiyiso's understanding of industrialization within the context of greater automation, the advent of artificial intelligence. What do we mean as Ntiyiso when we speak of industrialization?
Yeah. Thank you, Aubrey. Look, Africa, and or let me say South Africa and Africa in general, we are not a highly industrialized economy. Maybe South Africa we are a bit, but we're also aware that in the past 20, 25 years we've been de-industrializing. But when you look at the continent as a whole, our industrial age has not, come to the fore, as it were. And of course, the situation around poverty, unemployment, the triple ills, as they call it, bedevils us because of, I would say, lack of industry to create the type of wealth that we need as an economy. So I think for us, even before we talk about where industry is in terms of technology, automation, and all of those issues. You spoke about the extractionist type of approach. We are not in the game, let me put it that way. And there's a need for us to enter the game as soon as we can. And those issues around where automation, technology is, just speaks to the potential and the advantage that we can have if we enter the game now, because you always have your first mover advantage, but there's also a last mover advantage. And I think we can go in there and basically build an industrial base that takes advantage of all these technologies. But first and foremost, we need to enter the game, and we need to have a strategy of how to enter the game.
Ntiyiso has been quite a pioneer as a black consulting firm with its entry into the industrial space. You've been involved in the development of various factories at various value chains of the industrial process. Take me back. Take me back to when Ntiyiso Consulting first really understood yourselves as a player, a black player in the industrial place.
Yeah, very interesting question. Ideas build phenomenon. So even before Ntiyiso Consulting was born, there was an idea around industrialization. Our MD for industrial consulting, Mr. Mkonas, and I, as far back as 2001, we had worked out a model of how South Africa, especially Limpopo at that time, could industrialize, and we build up this model, which hopefully we'll talk to later. And for about 4 years, we've had conversations, with the Limpopo provincial government, basically selling them this model of how we can set up systems to industrialize. And around 2004, because those guys kept on asking, so what's the project that you guys want to do? And this was obviously, as I said, before Ntiyiso Consulting was born in its current form. And they didn't appreciate that, you can have an industrial project, but you can also have an ecosystem that can churn out industrial projects. And that's what we were selling. And as I said, we might talk to that later on. So around 2004, that's when we decided, okay, maybe let's respond to these guys the way they want us to respond. And we went and picked up a project on Sisal. These are massive plantations of this plant called Sisalama or Sisal. It looks like aloe. It's got long leaves in a rosette format. And you scrape them and you get strands of white fiber, which is used to create twines, which are also then used to create or to make ropes that are used in the maritime industry, cords that are used in the agricultural industry for tomato growing, rugs, and other products, even bags and so forth. So we went and reclaimed those plantations because they were lying fallow, and went around, got the old machines, put this whole thing up, set up a cooperative, because these plantations are in communities, and we needed to create a cohort of beneficiaries, and these beneficiaries will also put up their labor, as input into the whole project. And we went around raising money, and we managed to raise about 25 million rands from the DTI. Then rebuild this. We had one factory in Limpopo, and we also went in the northwest and also rebuilt one of the other factories. But then the other point was to say, let's not just decorticate, which is the process of extraction of the fibers, and just sell the fiber. Let's take it one step and create the yarns. So we went to China and sourced a machine to create the yarns, which is really the cords. And we then also put up some downstream processes to create rugs and bags. And I think we had about 110 people working there. So that was our first foray into this whole area. And this was before Ntiyiso became more of a consulting firm. Although we're doing this on a consultancy basis, but that also formed the foundation for the other two parts of the firm, which is your business consulting, because in there we were experimenting with every value chain of business management, as it were, from an industrialization point of view. And of course, over time we gravitated into a consulting firm proper. But some 3-4 years ago, we remembered our first love, and we then brought in Anthony, because at that time, he was just doing this part-time as a chemical engineer, working for a petroleum firm. And we reintroduced industrialization consulting with a much greater outlook, because you're not just looking at building factories, but you need to build in infrastructure to support those factories, roads, water, electricity, sewer systems, and so forth, so that you're able then to support these industries.
So clearly, industrialization and the approach to economic development has, or Ntiyiso's genesis has its origins really in the industrial space. Conceptually, what are we talking about when we speak of industrialization? Because my concern, Alex, is that we can fall into the pitfall of jargon. What, as far as Ntiyiso is concerned, is industrialization, and what does it involve?
And I think that's a very important question, because the issue of industrializing, deindustrializing of South Africa, the need to industrialize.
First industrial revolution, second.
Yeah, all of those things have become cliches. These are speeches in parliament, in rallies, and all of those places. But I think if we want, I spoke about how Africa has been left behind in this industrialization race, if you may call it in that manner. So it's important that we are empirical in the way we understand it. And I'm saying that because, industrialization has to have context. There has to be a context within which a geography industrialize. And by that, I mean that we should not look at industrialization as just merely copying factories in Europe or America or Asia, right? We as Africa has to look at industrialization from the point of view of our immediate surrounding and situation. We talk about, again, this extractionist approach. Unlike many of the industrial powers, we have abundance of resources, for example, which already sets us in a particular position and give us an advantage. We have a continent that lacks in so many ways. My number says, and I stand to be corrected, that the penetration rate, for example, of energy, electricity, in the continent hovers around 3%, right? So we've got this huge deficit of electricity infrastructure. We have a huge deficit of water infrastructure. We have huge deficit of, I would say, all type of infrastructure. Then, of course, we've got poverty. We've got issues around skills. Our skills, we train our skills and they go and work in other geographies. We've got issues of political instability. So whatever industrialization undertaking that we undertake, so to speak, it has to be conceptualized within the context of those realities. Some advantages, some disadvantages.
What I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the industrial project, as far as Ntiyiso is concerned, mustn't be just a money-making process. It must solve a problem.
Absolutely.
No,
Absolutely.
I've got no problem with people making money.
Oh, yes. No,
People must make money.
Money is made in the process.
But what I'm hearing you say is that there has to be a homegrown problem-solving approach in the way that we industrialize.
Absolutely, absolutely. And those problems that we solve, of course, we want to create industrial products that will be sold worldwide, no doubt about it, right? because, hidden in industrialization is culture, right? So, and hence I'm
Explain
saying,
that to me. Explain that to me.
yeah. So, because, and this is my own understanding of culture. Culture is by definition territorial, right? Because it's
And contextual.
and contextual, certainly.
Right.
It's a product of experiences and how the human responds to that environment, that is immediate, right? So when you invent industrial products, right, your process of inventing those products is informed by your outlook of the reality
Understood.
around you.
Understood.
Right?
Understood.
So embedded in the products that you create is your world view, your beliefs, and so forth, right? There's one small little joke on Instagram where, they show a sports car, and it has two seats, and they say it's not by coincidence that this car has two seats, because when you're successful, you probably don't want too many people around you, so just one person,
Yeah.
all of those kind of things. So part of us industrializing is us basically coding our culture and our cultural beliefs and our outlooks into the products that we create. And hence I emphasize that those products have to be first and foremost be created to respond to the existential challenges of the day. And then only then, obviously, we can then look at how those products can cross markets and go and serve in other
Jurisdictions, sure.
geographies,
Yeah.
as it were. So that is the one part. But having said that, what's also important, and back to this whole thing of industrialization as a cliche, is that we have to be cognizant that for us to industrialize, there has to be some form of discipline that we follow. So primary research, for example, it's very important, because whatever problem that we want to solve, it has to be informed by science, it has to be informed by sociology, it has to be informed by other areas of knowledge that are important in creating industrial products. Now we've got universities. South Africa, I think, we are one of the most endowed countries in Africa in terms of the number of universities. It's very important that the research that is conducted in those universities somehow link to some greater goal of eventually achieving some form of industrialization by way of providing raw data that informs the next stage of industrialization, which is, I spoke about primary research, which is secondary research, which is basically the amalgamation of the outcomes of primary researchers to start forming into some form of a solution. Because of course, the first input, as I did indicate earlier, has to be the problems that our society, faces.
I'm hearing you say that over and above the manufacturing of certain goods, certain things which in 1,000 years from now will be artifacts that archaeologists study about South Africa and the rest of Africa, is that it must be supported by empirical scientific research. What that suggests to me is that you're not only looking to make stuff, but you want to make stuff that is informed by disciplines in the scientific world and the research that comes from that, not to just make these things, but to innovate.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because what I'm hearing is that you don't just want to make pots, or you don't just want to make cars, but you want to make cars or whatever product that is informed by empirical scientific study, so that it is relevant and a real problem solver of the moment that you occur in.
You know, I cannot overemphasize that, and it's a very important thing, because people think industrialization is merely, and I use merely, you know, very deliberately, I mean rather deliberately, just saying, you know, these cushions are manufactured in Europe, and we also use cushions in South Africa. So we're going to open a factory to manufacture cushions, right? The problem with that, and we've been told many times, is that if these cushions are manufactured in Germany and you want to start manufacturing them in South Africa, you're going to struggle with competing with the German manufacturer or the Chinese manufacturer, right? Also because these guys have been doing the same thing maybe for the past 100 years, and you want to start. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do some of those things as maybe one of the strategies by which we industrialize. But if we want to become, and which I think we should strive to be, an industrial powerhouse, because we must never think that every invention, every innovation, every solution has already been created. We need to follow exactly that approach where we look at problems. I mean, if you look at where we are, for example, the issue of climate is a real issue,
yeah,
right? So if you want to enter, for example, the automotive industry, it wouldn't be wise to just merely go and copy the drawings of an internal combustion engine. You may want to say, what is the next frontier of human evolution in terms of transport, for example? So,
I mean, I'm hearing from my friends in the motor industry that I think by 2030, certain countries, certainly in Europe, will not be buying internal combustion engines. That's why everybody's moving to the electrical vehicle
yes.
situation.
Yes.
So I hear you that there must be a forward-thinking approach to whatever it is that we want to manufacture and whatever industries we want to create. I want us to take a commercial break, but I want to talk about a critical part of what you've already said, was to say we can probably build a factory, but it's got to be built within a context. No factory just gets built. There's got to be water infrastructure. There's got to be electricity infrastructure. I want to know how your approach, as far as the lack of those kinds of infrastructure is concerned on the African continent is concerned, right? In Europe, you can just put up a factory. There's electricity, there's waterworks. We don't have that in many parts of this continent, even in this country. What is Ntiyiso's approach to that reality? Because my sense is that we can't industrialize if we haven't sorted out that infrastructural problem. I'd like for us to talk about that when we come back. Please stay with us as I speak to the Chief Executive Officer of Ntiyiso Group. We're talking about industrialization, which is a major focus of the Ntiyiso Group going forward. Stay with us.
The Ntiyiso Consulting Group is an authentically African and globally wide management consulting firm which seeks to empower institutions that enable Africa's development. This impact is delivered through 3 subsidiaries: Ntiyiso Revenue Consulting, Ntiyiso Business Consulting, and Ntiyiso Industrialization Consulting. Our team of over 200 consultants provides sustainable, evidence-based solutions to complex management problems and are subject matter experts in strategy, governance, organizational turnaround, revenue enhancement, and unlocking new economic streams for growth. Visit www.ntiyisoconsulting.co.za for more information. Ntiyiso Consulting Group. Truth, trust, results.
Hello and welcome once again as we continue our conversation here on The Truth in Development, powered by the Ntiyiso Consulting Group. My guest is Mr. Alex Mabunda. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Ntiyiso Consulting Group, and we've been talking about industrialization conceptually. I'm going to be going into a conversation now about practically. What are we talking about? And I come back, Mr. Mabunda, to the issue of the way you characterized your approach as the Ntiyiso Consulting Group to industrialization, that is informed by the realities of the ground here on the African continent. You can't simply put up a factory. There are certain infrastructural deficits that we are dealing with across the continent. Talk to me about that. I mean, I've understood the conceptual framework. I've understood the fact that ours is not going to be an approach that is extractionist. I've understood that we are wanting to solve real quintessential existential problems of our continent and the areas that we live in. I get that. But there are some practical considerations here. We don't have electricity. We don't have water in certain areas that have the potential for the development of factories. How do we deal with that?
Yeah. So, and I guess that is the cousin of industrialization. If you think about conceptualization from research, primary research, secondary research, product development, prototyping, and so forth. That's the one side of the coin. Certainly the other side is about infrastructure. And indeed, it would be not wise to just talk about industrialization, just looking at how can we get that product that we're buying from China to be manufactured in South Africa, and how can we get that factory to be built in Africa, without thinking about infrastructure. And the infrastructure challenge has other elements to it, which as a firm we are very much aware of it, and we build our value proposition to respond to those issues. So let's look at public infrastructure that will support industrialization: water, electricity, refuse systems, sewer systems, roads, new townships. All of those pieces of infrastructure needs funding, just like you will of course need funding to build factory. But municipal infrastructure, because that's exactly what it is, has got another element to it, wherein it's provided to the public as a service, and the public has to pay for that service. Now cities are built around that, provide infrastructure and from the infrastructure to continue to maintain and grow that infrastructure. And this now starts to, then I've mentioned the whole issue of funding. Governments don't have enough money, our governments. We don't have enough money to fund development of infrastructure. So the only way we can and we should fund that infrastructure is to mobilize private money. But private money has to grow, has to be returned to the investors. Private money follows trust. No one wants to put money in building a bridge or a water reticulation system or a water treatment plant without a sense that the government that is taking that loan or investment will be able to create a return and be able to pay back. So issues around revenue management systems for cities becomes a very, very important input. And this is a pure, as the name suggests, management concern, right? When you look at cities around in Africa, including South Africa, we have this problem, and I'm saying problem because in our view it's not really a problem, of overcrowding, because of course people move from rural areas into cities. The cities don't have enough infrastructure to cope with the influx of people into those geographies, and what you find is that the existing infrastructure gets overloaded, deteriorate, and you start to have sewer spilling everywhere, roads, deteriorating into potholes and all of those kind of things. But all the while, because our cities have not mastered the art of extracting value from the population that moves into the cities. One of the GCAs and I visited Mozambique the one time, and we wanted to understand the systems by which the cities there, I think it was Matola, generates revenue. And the one thing that surprised us was when they said, oh, you know what, to live in the city, there's a tax associated with it, which we don't do in South Africa, for example. So that was quite interesting. But then there's no customer database to levy that tax. So you've got people in the city who by law should be paying to live in the city. But you don't have...
no census was done to check who is there to be paying that.
Absolutely. Yeah? And doing those things in the age of technology, spoke about technology, right, where everyone has a cell phone number, that creates identity even if you don't have proper identity systems. So it's a question of, then you spoke about innovation, just some innovative way to then say, okay, let's get everyone into some form of a database, right? Let's build up the debt for those who are not paid. Let's age the debt. Let's find ways by which we can then collect this debt from these
in a previous conversation with the GCA, Mr. Mielani, he spoke of the need for a revenue consciousness in the way that we manage our cities, so that we are able to consistently extract revenue from those settlements in order to be able to industrialize.
Absolutely.
But that's not always in your control. Government is really the controller of that segment of the equation. I'm interested then to know, what are the efforts to try and bring governments on board? Are governments amiable? Do they listen to this approach towards industrialization that Ntiyiso is championing? Because without that support from government, all of the great ideas, the approach and philosophy to industrialization that you guys have might be worth nothing?
Absolutely. So you will know that as a firm, our mission is to empower institutions that enable Africa's development. So as a firm, we don't do anything for ourselves and just for the sake of ourselves. We are out there to partner with these institutions, generally public institutions, government institutions, that are there to basically facilitate development, and we form support. So certainly in our value proposition, our approach, much part of it, it's really to create this ecosystem of trust between us and the governments that we converse with. We say in our pay line, if you've heard our advert, it's truth, trust, and results. Ntiyiso itself means truth
Sure.
in Xitsonga language here in South Africa. So we are already predisposed, so to speak, to deal with that element, of the challenge. I did say earlier in my opening that the topic around industrialization has to be that wide enough I even made mention of our political situation, because it has indeed to respond to all these realities, including the realities of, politics, governance,
Yeah.
and governments. And part of us doing what you and I are doing now is also aimed at informing, educating, conscientizing, our public institutions about, the value of partnerships with the private sector, such as ourselves, to solve these problems. Because yes, indeed, for a city manager, for a mayor, for a city councillor, it might look daunting, when your streets are packed with people and, your water system is only so much and you are helpless, your coffers are dry. And that's where we come in and say, no, look, this thing is not a problem. It's actually an opportunity, Here are the systems, here are the policies, here are the processes, here are ways in which we can turn what looks like a problem into an opportunity. This is the potential revenues that you can generate. And once you're able to show that you can generate those revenues, you're now building confidence for the private sector to front load you with the necessary capital that you need to build this infrastructure, with the knowledge that this infrastructure is serving people who can and do pay for this infrastructure. And in that manner, because one of the things that we need to also factor in when we're talking about industrialization, it's not just building factories. It's really about, building urban settlements where the quality of life index is at a certain level. And of course, factories certainly are not to be built as an end on themselves. This is to support, development by way of giving people quality of life where they can even begin to express themselves culturally and so forth, and create the idealism.
You mentioned that, and I found that very interesting when you said, listen, embedded in industrialization is culture. I thought that was quite powerful. I want to hear your thoughts. For example, your focus is South Africa and the rest of the African continent. How indigenous knowledge systems are factored into your approach. But more importantly, I'm interested to hear from you, what are the low-hanging fruits in as far as the areas of industrialization that exist in our communities are concerned? What are the low-hanging fruits? And don't forget to help me understand how those low-hanging fruits are going to be assisted by the infrastructure development that you've just been speaking about. Because I'm beginning to understand that it's not just about building factories that produce goods. It has to be in context. It's got to be relevant to the problems of that particular community in order for it to be sustainable. So I get that. But what are the low-hanging fruits? And how do you support that with the infrastructure that must look after those industries that you develop, the low-hanging fruits?
Yeah, and I mean, that's exactly what we should be thinking the back of our minds when we think about this industrialization journey, right? To say, what are those things that will quickly position us, to succeed in this journey, right? It may not be wise to start with, the researching on telescopes, right? Look, they're very important, right? When maybe nutrition is our immediate challenge that we...
The forming of bricks.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
you know, building abodes,
Sure.
you know, that are habitable and so forth. So maybe alternative building materials, you know, can we start planting bamboo, right? And maybe, you know, bring in some weaving system that the villagers understand very well to start using those as panels that can be cladded with some other material, you know, to start maybe, you know, building houses in urban settlement at a rate that's commensurate with the size of the challenge that we have. But to be more specific to your question, the whole issue of indigenous knowledge system, the greater thing about it is that that becomes our sort of position of strength, because, or rather our competitive position, because it's unique to us. I'll give you just two examples. I've had the privilege of coming from, you know, a very traditional community, grew up in a village in the rural areas, so the ways of Africans, you know, outside the inputs of your civilized, and I'm putting civilized,
Sure.
you know,
Urbanized,
westernized world,
modernized,
modernized certainly, because so there's a food product, for example, where I come from. You know, this food product is made of just two inputs, if not three, but I think it's two. Just cornmeal, dry cornmeal, and dried peanuts, and salt. So that's three. But this food product, you know, if you eat, let's say, 50 grams of it, or even 10 grams or 20 grams, it fills you up.
It's got everything in there.
Yeah.
You've got the protein from the peanuts. You've got the carbohydrates from the meal. You've got the taste, I suppose, from... You've almost got everything in there, right?
But here's the most amazing part of it. It doesn't rot. It doesn't need to be refrigerated, right? So back in the years when they traveled on foot or using cattle or horse carts or whatever, they will use it to carry as food along the way for those characteristics, because, you know, a small piece of it will fill you up and it makes you thirsty. So it encourages you to drink water.
Stay hydrated, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, you can see what kind of impact such a product can do for an army. We wouldn't propagate for wars, but maybe wars are a reality.
Armies,
you know?
Guys that are in the protection of wildlife.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Right. But even just for our own nutrition, you know, in our communities. But I'm saying that such a product, I think, has potential, right? And then
It's not strange to us. We have a relationship with it.
Yeah.
The marketing guys should think about that
Come
too.
along.
Yeah, sure.
You know, and then you have another product. This one is we call it dinda, right? It narrows. I mean, it spreads on the ground. Very small leaves and small stems that just, you know, make a network. You pull this, you mix it with water. It's got such viscous texture that back in the years we used to just take an old tire, mix this thing with water, just a little bit of it, right? And then we'll put two poles and we push the tire as a vehicle.
Right.
But where you want applications where you need viscosity, but then they also use it as a shampoo, right? and the hair come out so nicely when you use this product as shampoo. And the way it grows, it's so generous, right? That it's very, very easy to cultivate. Of course, it was a wild plant, so to speak, in that fashion. But of course, this is where now we talk about research, right? Someone must take this thing and take it to the lab and look at the chemical characteristics, of it. Some of these things have got medicinal purposes. The last one, very quickly. This one, I'm forgetting the name. But if that thing touches your skin, it will itch so badly that you want to chop off your hand, right? But maybe for military applications, those kind of things, and maybe there could be other characteristics there.
And sometimes I know that, and the university guys will tell us that there is the ability of reverse engineering something. So if we know that it produces the itch, it could be the fundamental building block for a medicine that actually heals that, right? So I hear what you're saying.
Absolutely.
So what I'm hearing is that the low-hanging fruits towards industrialization, particularly in Africa, are already embedded in what we already live like.
Absolutely.
The way that we already live is the opportunity to industrialize. So what we eat, what we believe, and the scientific research approach is the opportunity that we have to begin an industrial process that uses what we already have.
Absolutely, and also give us a competitive edge when we have to take these products beyond our borders. I was at pain earlier to say that I don't think we can industrialize by doing cut and paste of what the industrialized economies around the world are doing as Africa. I've had the privilege of traveling to Europe even just lately, and the lack of respect that you get as an African when you get to those places, right? And the immediate reaction is anger, when you feel disrespected as an African. But when you sober up and really think about it, is that we ourselves have, relegated ourselves into a position of disrespect.
Yeah,
right.
We've become just consumers, and
yes.
The world, particularly the developing world, doesn't see us as authentic producers of anything.
Absolutely.
I hear you. I want to take another break. When we come back, I really want to talk about, people are going to watch this conversation globally. I want to find out from you, why then, if I'm in Ghana, if I'm in Egypt, if I'm in China, and I want to take up the possible opportunities of industrialization in South Africa and the rest of Africa, why it is important to speak to Ntiyiso Consulting. We've been speaking so far about the approach and philosophical sort of conceptualization of the idea of industrialization that is quintessentially Ntiyiso. I want you to speak to the market out there and explain to them why Ntiyiso, if you are thinking about industrialization and investing in those projects in the African continent. When I come back, we continue with that conversation with Alex Mabunda, the CEO of Ntiyiso Consulting Group. Please stay with us.
The Ntiyiso Consulting Group is an authentically African and globally wide management consulting firm which seeks to empower institutions that enable Africa's development. This impact is delivered through 3 subsidiaries: Ntiyiso Revenue Consulting, Ntiyiso Business Consulting, and Ntiyiso Industrialization Consulting. Our team of over 200 consultants provides sustainable, evidence-based solutions to complex management problems and are subject matter experts in strategy, governance, organizational turnaround, revenue enhancement, and unlocking new economic streams for growth. Visit www.ntiyisoconsulting.co.za for more information. Ntiyiso Consulting Group. Truth, trust, results.
Welcome once again. We continue our conversation with the Group CEO of the Ntiyiso Group, Ntiyiso Consulting Group, and we've been talking about industrialization. We've had a conversation about industrialization conceptually and philosophically. We've had a conversation about the approach to industrialization by the Ntiyiso Group at a practical level. Now I want Mr. Alex Mabunda to speak to the market that we are speaking to through this conversation. Why? Why would a company in Europe, in China, but most importantly, on the African continent that is thinking about the industrialization program in their country, or perhaps as an investor, why would it be important to have that conversation with Ntiyiso Consulting?
Yeah, so I think as a firm of 18 years now, and I spoke about the whole idea of moving from an idea of Ntiyiso Consulting to the actual phenomenon. So on paper, we are an 18-year-old firm, but the seed of Ntiyiso Consulting was planted some 4 years prior to 2005, when the firm was started. So in the 23, 22 years of our existence, if I add that 4-year period, we've only ever preoccupied ourselves about stuff that, or elements that work out to create a catalytic environment for industrialization. You will note that Ntiyiso Consulting has 3 subsidiaries. One is the Industrialization Consulting. I won't say much because that's exactly what we're talking about. The other one is Revenue Consulting, which is really about swelling the coffers of
and we touched
cities,
on that
and we
in the
touched
earlier conversation. Yeah.
But the other one is Business Consulting, which is framed around supporting institutions, because maybe the least spoken part of industrialization is the need for strong institutions. Because without institutions that support that whole ecosystem, you can have the best product, you can have the best factory, but if you don't have institutional support, a factory itself is run inside a company that should have proper governance systems, proper organizational structure, proper business processes, populated by people who are able and skilled, but most importantly with the right culture, that supports that business. Supported also by relevant technology to then make up the whole, to allow and make that institutions to deliver on its mandate. So we solve institutional problems, we solve industrialization problems, and we solve revenue problems. And combined, we believe is what you need in order to create the nurturing environment for industrialization in the context that we are explaining it, fit for purpose, respond to the existential challenges of the day, take advantage of what you have. So in that regard, You know, whether you're a private firm wanting to support your government, or you are a government wanting to prop up your geography from a development point of view, because those three elements, industrialization, revenue, and institutional support, are ingredients of development. I did indicate earlier that our organizational mission, which is to say that which we wake up preoccupied about when we go to work, is empowering institutions that enable Africa's development. And so in that regard, we see ourselves in terms of our value proposition as a company that unlocks development.
One of the things that is a little bit of the bane of Africa's march towards prosperity is the fact that we sometimes find ourselves caught up in unstable governments, political upheaval and inconsistencies. Give me a sense of the universality. In other words, the universal applicability of the principles towards industrialization that you and I have been discussing now. So you have one country, for example, that has a very strong socialist leaning, and then maybe another country that is governed by free market principles. How applicable are some of the principles that you and I have been discussing tonight to various different models of governance? Would there be a problem, for example, for the industrialization model that you and I have been talking about to be applied in the DRC, for example, versus Rwanda, versus Botswana, versus Zimbabwe?
We don't think so. And of course, we've laid the foundation of how and what is it that should inform the project of industrializing. And of course, in a greater sense, in terms of where now we are pitching the discussion of development, because that's exactly, you know, the problem that we're trying to solve, the problem of development. Industrialization feeds into it. Strong cities feeds with infrastructure, of course, feeds into it. But strong institutions feeds into it. You know, if you look at, because we talk about political instability and political models, right? I think much of the, and I think I have an article coming out in one of the publications where I write specifically about this. And I think, if I remember well, it says something around the title, to say that it's not about solving the politics. We need to solve the systems, right? It's true that you know, Africa has a particular history of colonialism, slavery, if I count backwards, neo-colonialism, and much of the struggles that we've had to fight to deal with those challenges has been within the context of politics, right? So the terrain of the struggle has mainly focused on politics. And as a result, we tend to overemphasize the role of politics in our development. And, you know, not even forget, but not account for the fact that actually politics, or is it politics? Politics is just part of a greater ecosystems. Strong institutions, which speaks now to our business consulting arm of the firm. Strong institutions, in my view, you know, outlives political models, political parties, political leaders. And it's very important that we begin to focus on building strong institutions, and not merely just from a governance point of view, but merely including those elements I've spoken about. I've spoken about organizational structures, I've spoken about processes, people, technology, culture, right? Those things, if we build and invest in them, will outlive any form of a political model that even has the potential to disrupt the path to development.
I'm getting the sense that you're saying that these principles that inform your approach to the industrialization process and project are objective and ideologically agnostic. So ultimately, what we're looking for here is how to make countries function, how to make communities function, regardless of whatever ideology that particular country, region, place espouses. Because what you're saying to me is that a thirst is a thirst, and it will be quenched by water.
Absolutely.
We need to bring water to that specific area.
Yes.
Regardless of whether you wear a blue t-shirt or a red t-shirt or a yellow t-shirt. Water is water, and it quenches thirst.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, and there are examples already that have already played themselves out. I mean, if you look at Asia, for example, you look at China, you look at America, you look at Europe, it can be argued that maybe, you know, America and Europe have sort of similar political culture,
approaches, yeah.
right, or ideological outlook of politics. But to look at China, the last time I checked, the leading party there, it's something called Chinese Communist Party. We can argue how communist, to what extent, right? So political systems should not define, you know, our chances of turning the corner in as far as development powered by industrialization and strong institutions and strong cities.
I'll tell you that as we close, the one thing that I take away from this conversation is how you've successfully been able to link culture, identity, our authentic presence in the world as Africans, to the need for us to industrialize. I'm taking away from this conversation the idea that we can industrialize without having to be extractionist and non-sustainable. I'm taking away from this conversation the idea that we can industrialize and not have to have the regrets in years to come of a world that has been depleted, not only of its own resources, but of an identity of a people. Makes me encouraged to say and to think that we are perhaps starting a revolution here, an industrial revolution that will take African industrialization to the world. It's a new idea. It's a bold idea. It's a brave idea. And I'm hoping that Ntiyiso Consulting is going to be the vehicle that brings that idea to fruition. When are we going to start seeing the fruits of some of this thinking?
Yeah,
As we close.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well summarized. And indeed, this is a revolution. This is, you know, something that as a firm we're very committed to. This is something that we invite, you know, stakeholders, you know, to join in this movement, whether it's governments out there, local government, regional governments, national governments, public institutions, to say that let's begin to own our destination You made reference to technology where it is. I reinterpreted that to ascribe it to the last mover advantage. Let us be the last mover in industrialization, and basically take everything that works with regard to industrialization, discard everything that is detrimental to the environment, for example, to the cultures, right? Let's reimagine industrialization in that context and restore the Africa that we read about, whether you read about ancient Egypt, Ethiopia.
Because industrialization started here, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Let's reclaim our position among nations in the world. When are we going to see the fruit? From our point of view as a firm, in all the projects that we are working in, we are beginning to see that fruit. You know, we are busy decongesting traffic in smaller cities and towns. We are beginning to redefine for cities, you know, the best models of how to swell their coffers. Of course, this is a long, painful, and sometimes so arduous a journey that, you know, like the children of Israel when they went with Moses out of Egypt. Sometimes you even want to abandon the cause.
Sometimes you want to remember Egypt.
You want to remember Egypt, you know, and of course these are allegorical representations because Egypt remains Africa. So let's stay the course, excuse me, and let's not at any point, you know, be deterred or be discouraged. It's going to be a long and painful journey, but it's a journey that we have to undertake for the benefit of our future generations.
Mr. Alex Mawunda, I think that this is, as I said, a revolutionary way of thinking. I wish you the best. I don't think that this undertaking could have wanted better hands. I believe that it will be achieved, and I want to thank you very much for stepping forward to taking up the mantle and the responsibility of what this project means. And thank you very much for joining me this evening.
Thank you, Aubrey.
Alex Mawunda is the CEO of the Ntiyiso Consulting Group, and we've been discussing, as you've heard, the ideas around and the philosophies around Ntiyiso Consulting's approach to industrialization. And I hope that you'll get in touch with us as we have more of these conversations. Thank you very much for joining us.